Hello, my name is Greg Nilgis. This video is in support of Sonoran Desert Institute's FTE 211 1911 Advanced Armors course, and today's date is 23 March 2024. My references for the various parts of this video will be the SDI FTE 211 Week 6 lecture. So first of all, we have no ammunition in the work area, and the firearm, we will ensure that it is safe and clear. We'll drop the magazine, feed source, and we do a visual and physical inspection. We have a clear firearm. So part one, we're going to assess the sear trigger engagement. Specifically, we're going to assess the sear angle and see what we think about that. So there are basically three types of angles, with a caveat being a fourth, but there's positive, neutral, and negative. And you either want, ideally you want neutral, but positive is acceptable. So first I'll do just kind of a feel for the trigger, which I've done in the past. And the trigger pull weight is not light, but that's not what we're really assessing necessarily. But it's pretty clean. So right off the bat, I'm thinking neutral, but the way I have learned to check this is to, when I pull the trigger, to watch the hammer, and it's a minute movement, and I'm kind of block it with my finger so it doesn't go. And if the trigger moves further rearward before it breaks, that means you probably have, you have a positive sear angle. And if it moves forward before breaking, if you perceive a forward motion before breaking, that would be a negative sear angle, which would be a bad thing. And this one does not move forward or negative, it just breaks and goes. So I'm comfortable saying this is a neutral trigger angle, which is fine. It probably could stand to be polished a little bit to smooth it out, and perhaps even have a relief cut in just to shorten the trigger pull just a little bit. The reason you don't want a negative is because it stands a chance of the hammer falling off of the sear on its own, or if it's bumped a little bit. So that's part one. For parts 2 and 3 of this week's video, we're going to talk about three different components of the firearm that were randomly selected, and we're going to talk about the fitment of these components, in my opinion, and if there are any issues with them, what we could do to rectify them. So the first one we'll talk about is the trigger. Just looking at it right off the bat, the geometry looks square. It doesn't have any warpage in it or bends, and I can test with a magazine. I don't have a trigger block, but I do have a magazine, and it slides in. A magazine slides in and out with no issues, so that's good. The other thing we can check is the edges of it to see if there's any roughness, and there is indeed. I feel a little on this edge right here. I feel a little, yeah, I don't know what you call it. I wouldn't call it a burr, but it's kind of like a burr but longer, and that's not good. The rest of the edges all feel good and clean. So what I would do is, at least this edge, if not all of them, take a stone or a light needle file and just kind of go over them, just cut any edge off of there that shouldn't be there. And the other thing we can do is we can actually do a fitment into the slide, or the frame, I'm sorry, and see how it rides. It has a little up and down play, but not much. Side to side, again, not much. And it slides in and out of there and falls of its own accord. We could improve that by stoning the trigger track. And as a matter of fact, on the right side, I do see a little slight ridge. It doesn't look like it's impeding anyway, but it may be a little smoother if we stone it lightly. We'll probably do that at some point coming up. And the next part we'll talk about is the ejector and the ejector fit. And frankly, there's not a lot to talk about on this one. The ejector is secure on the frame, so that's good. It's not loose in any way. As far as the angle goes, that's what we'd be looking at, the angle. The angle, there is a slight angle cut on there, which is, there should be, but I can't confirm the ejection pattern because this firearm hasn't been fired yet. But if it didn't eject properly or haphazardly, perhaps, we may adjust that angle a little bit so that it kicks out at about 45 degrees to the shooter's right and maybe 30 degrees to the rear, 30 to 45 degrees to the rear. We'd adjust that angle with a file a little bit at a time and then reassemble and try it again over and over again until we get it right. Too much is not good because you can't put it back on, as we all know. And the last part we'll talk about is the grip safety. Now, this one, there's not a lot. Well, I shouldn't say there's a lot. There's stuff we can talk about for sure, but there's stuff we can't talk about because it's disassembled or we can't check. But the first thing we're going to do is fitment, and it fits in there nicely. There's no, there's no rubbing or anything. It probably could even be a little tighter, frankly, but still, it's fine in that regard. As far as how it fits, contours with I should have had the pin ready. Contours with the frame. It looks like contours fairly nicely, and that's more ergonomics than anything else, or aesthetics. I'm sorry. So that's not that important. What we can't check is without actually having a functional firearm assembled, we can't really check the engagement with the trigger. But that's one thing we'd be looking at, how it engages with the trigger, and adjust accordingly. But if there were any issues with this fitment, we can always hone the sides down a little bit as necessary to get it to fit in there. And if there are any issues with trigger engagement, we can adjust that as necessary as well. And that's part 2 and 3.
All right, for part 4, we're going to polish a few surfaces on the 1911. We'll start with the trigger. We're going to really look at these edges right here, which I've discussed in one of my previous segments. The sides are fine, but we may hit those up with a stone, and the inside is smooth. I don't see any need for there, but we will address this engagement surface that the grip safety rides on, and as well as that, we will address the trigger tracks in here. The camera can't pick this up, at least not with my equipment anyway. But there is an area in there that looks like it could use some attention. And then we'll come back over to the grip safety, and we'll polish the engagement surface of where it engages the trigger, the rear of the trigger bow. And let's go to the hammer. We're going to try and polish. I'm probably going to talk more about it than doing it because I don't have the jigs that I'm hoping to get. But we're going to address the trigger hook here, or the notch, if you will. And I'm also going to polish the face of the trigger where it engages the firing pin stop, and we're going to polish that as well, that engagement surface. That'll help a little bit. And then we'll come to the disconnector. We're going to polish the top of the disconnector so it rides over the slide a little better, or the slide rides over it a little better, as well as the surface on the disconnector that engages the sear. And to the sear, we'll address that same surface that engages the disconnector, as well as try to polish, or again, at least discuss polishing until I get a jig, the sear angle. And then last but not least, there's not a lot of polishing here to do, but we're told to do it. So we're going to look at polishing the surfaces of the sear spring that engages the sear, and we'll probably go ahead and do the disconnector at the same time. Okay, we got some polishing done on these rascals. Hopefully got done what we're supposed to do. Let's start with the sear spring. Polished, it's not going to show up very good in the camera, but we polished the tip of this and even the tip where it engages the disconnector on the sear spring. Let's go to the disconnector. Polish the tip of the disconnector where the slide rides on it, and we also polish the engagement surfaces of the disconnector with the sear. Going to the sear, again, the surface that contacts the disconnector, we polish that. I lightly polished the sear angle, but as I discussed, until I get a jig, I don't want to do any serious polishing, but I did address it. Going to the trigger, I deburred all the edges around here. That's pretty much what I did on the trigger with the stone. Just kind of hit it with the stone, rubbing it across, and it's a lot smoother there. And speaking of that, we did hone the trigger track, and it won't show up in the camera, but there is a visible difference, and we'll see how that feels. Didn't want to do too much because if I take off too much, then it's going to feel loose. Going to the grip safety where it engages the trigger, I did polish that a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. Could be maybe more, but until we try it, we're not going to do more. And let's see, last, the hammer. Again, on the hammer hooks, I really don't have, even with my Optivisor on, I couldn't match the angle by hand, so I'm going to try to get some type of a jig to do that better. But I did hit it a little bit with the stone, but not very much. And I did polish the hammer face, as well as the firing pin stop where those engagement surfaces ride, so that should be a little smoother. Not that that'll make a big difference. I will need to follow up with some cold blue on that just to provide some protection. And that should do it for this part of the video.
Okay, for this part 6, we're going to do a simulated drop test, and we have no live ammunition in the work area. Feed sources removed and empty of cartridges, and we do a visual and physical inspection. We have a safe firearm. So what we're doing here is simulating a trigger that maybe is, or checking for a trigger that maybe is so light that if it was, even with the safeties engaged, if it was bumped or dropped, the sear and hammer may disengage or release and drop the hammer. So the way we'll do that is with a soft mallet of some sort. And here I have a polymer tipped hammer, and we're going to just kind of we want to use as much force as we could without fear of damaging the firearm, but you're not going to lay into it. And we'll even strike the hammer a little bit. And as much as we can confirm, we would say this passes a drop test. Okay, for part 5 of the video, we're going to do a safety system check and assessment. We're also going to check, do a dry fire and a dummy dry fire or dummy fire. A dummy cartridge firing test. First of all, we have no live ammunition in the work area. We do have a magazine loaded with several snap caps, and our firearm has no feed source inserted, and we have a visual and physical check of the chamber, so we have a safe firearm. So first of all, we'll check our safety system, and with the hammer cocked and the safety off or disengaged and the grip safety engaged, we're not going to grip it. We're going to see if okay, so that confirms the grip safety is functioning properly. Now we'll go ahead and engage the safety, and we'll grip the grip safety. So the safety system works, and now we'll confirm that it fires with the safety disengaged and the grip safety engaged. Yes, and pull the trigger. So that's safety system. All indications are it functions properly. So now we'll go to a dry fire test. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to, as much as possible, simulate the cycle of operation. And really all we're going to be able to do here is locking, unlocking, and cocking. And that all seems to work fine. I don't feel anything that feels unusual. There's some definite resistance. This, as we've stated before, this is a new firearm. It really hasn't been fired. So it really hasn't worn in quite yet. So that dry fire function check is good. We'll move on to the dummy function check. Again, we're checking for the cycle of operation with as much as we can simulate. About the only thing we can't really simulate here is firing. So we're going to start with the dummy cartridge inserted. We're going to rack slide as fast as we can and see what happens. Let me get this check. Sure enough, we got one chambered. So what we did there is we did feeding, chambering, locking, and we're actually cocking as well. And then we would fire the cartridge or simulate firing. And the next round we would That's why we wear safety glasses. You can't make this stuff up. Okay, that's interesting. Never had that happen before, but everything's possible. So there we also confirmed, we did firing it, and we confirmed ejecting as well and cocking. We'll do that a couple times, see if we can not duplicate the, that's better. And the next one, what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold the trigger back. Now with the trigger held back, we're gonna slowly release it and check the trigger reset disconnector. Reset. And there it is, reset's good. And last but not least, we have checked to confirm that the firearm does lock back. The follower locks back on the last round.